Black people are not poor. It is an absolute myth that any group of people can earn $300 billion, equal to the gross national product of the 14th richest nation in the world, and call themselves poor. We behave poorly. We need to teach our dollars some sense. Final point. December the 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks would not surrender her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. When Rosa Parks sat down, we stood up all over America with a new sense of consciousness. And what did we learn on December the 1st, 1955? We learned that there had been plenty of room in the front of the bus all along. All we ever had to do was to get up and move.
Well, Tony Brown, for a talk show host, you've been unusually well behaved throughout this program, and I thank you for your patience. Do I sound like a white racist to say, see what I mean? You can pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. Does that make you nervous if I say something like that?
No, but the context would make me nervous if you were suggesting, and you're not, that all blacks had to do was to go to work, and if they worked as hard as whites, we could make it. But that's not the context in which you're saying it. The context in which you're saying it is that we are looking at a group of people, 30 million people, who this year will earn $300 billion, equal to the 14th richest nation in the world. We're 12% of the population. We buy 18% of the orange juice, 20% of the rice, 26% of Cadillac cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have 350 black organizations, middle-class blacks, 1 million of which go to white hotels each summer. They spend $16 billion discussing white racism and black poverty. Now, there's no way in the world that white people can free black people, because freedom is not white people's to give. 2, white people, as I said in the piece, cannot do for us what we refuse to do for ourselves. 3, the key to this equation is the behavior of the black middle class. The key to this is not understanding whether or not whites like blacks or blacks like whites. I frankly have no interest in that at all. I have no interest in managed society. I'm not interested in having to sit next to people because they're white. I'm interested in being equal, and the only way you're equal is to have power. Alan Keyes said the most cogent thing said here tonight, and that is, we are talking about power, not whether or not white people have been fair, not whether they're nice people, not whether or not black people are good or bad, but whether or not you as a community of people have the instruments of defense, and in some cases of aggression, to protect your turf and or your interests. You can't have 30 million people handing over to another people 100% of their resources and blaming them for 100% of their problems. That is not intelligent. So what we need to do in the black community is A, decide to be competitive. And the only way we're going to be competitive is to use our resources. And the final thing I'd like to say is this: the primary resource we have as a people is not our money. It's what we know. And what you know is called human capital. And the fleet of human capital from the black community has been enormous in the name of integration. We've lost our brains to the white community, and nobody is there for the intergenerational transfer of information from middle-class people to poor people, so we now have what we call so-called underclass people.
But if what you know is that critically important, and I don't know anybody who will argue it, how is it possible, in the light of Mr. Kozol's nightmarish and brutally honest and well-researched review of the horror story of public education, especially in the inner cities, for black children to know anything?
White power structure and the white community in America are out of options. They can no longer afford racism, and they can no longer afford school systems that don't work, for this following reason. In 8 years, over 50% of the population workforce will be female and non-white. In 30 years, this will be a majority numerically non-white nation. If we do not train women and non-whites to go into the workforce for high-tech skill jobs in the next 8 years, none of us in this room is going to have a job at all. So Mr. Kozol, there's another dimension to what he is saying, and I'm sure he's more than aware of it, and that is, it is not black schools that have failed. The American school system has failed. It is not the ones who drop out that are the problem. The ones who graduate are the problem. We do not have a school system that does anything for post-secondary education, and we don't have a school system that does anything for the bottom 50%, which is why Germany and Japan are beating our brains out.
Regardless of the color of the student.
Regardless. Now, when you get to blacks, we cannot leave out of this equation the black middle class. And we cannot leave out of this equation, no matter what the government does, and the government should do something. We cannot leave out the obligation of the black middle class to transfer its wealth, primary wealth, which is human capital or information, to those in our community who don't have it.
May I ask you're a capitalist with a...
I am not a capitalist, and you said that before. I'm not interested in proving capitalism. I'm interested in using a free market system to alleviate the problems in the black community.
Is capitalist a bad word?
Well, if the way you're using it as though I am trying to prove that this system is better than that system.
No,
I'm not into ideology. You can call me anything you want.
You're a businessman who takes full advantage of the free market opportunities. Let me put it that way.
I'm trying to pay my rent and keep the phone
Very
ringing.
good.
Now, I don't know what you call that. Whatever you call that, that's what I do. Now, okay, so I am simply interested in this. There are 30 million of us. We earn $300 billion. We spend 6.6% of our money with one another, 95% with other people. I'm simply interested in creating structures so we can transfer that money back, and most of all, not to any black person in this room, but to poor black people, because the difference in the achievement of our community will not come from middle-class blacks like us who have done so well under affirmative action. Poor blacks didn't get a nickel. They're the ones who are hurting, which is why the black community is in such dire difficulty.
We're leaving out a lot of things in this story. There are hard-working, good people working in community development corporations, and your emphasis, I like the piece that Tony did, your emphasis on middle-class African-American neighborhoods and the growth of these neighborhoods in cities and in suburbs is something that mustn't be left out of this picture. Otherwise, people aren't going to try.
Your point is made at a time when the middle class is identified with the NAACP, the Urban League, and the traditional We Shall Overcome civil rights leaders of the 50s and 60s that have been all but abandoned and ignored by younger people, Sister Souljah included.
May I just make one comment on that? I think that the dice are loaded, and that's what's left out of Mr. Brown's piece. See, there was a period of time in this country after Reconstruction where African people owned a lot of land, owned a lot of businesses, and did a lot of things. But what happened was the American government, the Ku Klux Klans, and other organizations organized in smashing that effort. So it's not that we haven't tried to own lands and have not organized businesses. It's that if you are African in America, or in Latin America, or in the Caribbean, or in the continent, you will be hunted no matter what you do, because they do not want us to survive and become self-sufficient. And you can say no, but you haven't lived this life. You haven't lived this life.
Mayor Kelly's entitled.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of reason for a lot of our anger, given our history in this country that persists even in 1992. No question about it. But the issue becomes, how do you harness that anger? Do we sit up here and talk about our history, or do we harness that anger to become an empowered community?
You do both.
Now, let me just finish. There's some of us who are struggling right now to empower our communities through educational systems and a whole host of things, trying to shift some capital in the hands of our own community so that when you produce something creative, that the people who have control over the distribution rights are African Americans as against other type of Americans, and that when we go out in this global marketplace, we will be a force with which to be reckoned. We seem to forget, however, that in the midst of all of this, there is a shift that is occurring throughout this whole globe. It isn't just the plight of those of us who are African Americans. Our plight is exacerbated, but we're in a global market. We're dealing with people from all over the world where a market can be taken over overnight by new developing nations. We need to have a better educational system. America's educational system is in a sorry condition. And the worst form of capitalism was perpetuated, espoused in the last decade by a man named Ronald Reagan with, are you better off today? Walked away from research and development, walked away from education, walked away from from savings, walked away from the capacity for capital formation. The worst form of capitalism was symbolized in the last decade, and that's why we're paying a handsome price. Now, we can sit up and get angry, we can sit up and talk about it, but the question is, what are we going to do about it? And I say, let's start doing something about it now and empower our own community and stop pointing the finger at one another.
I have a question for Mr. Brown, actually, and that is, if Rosa Parks taught us that we could sit in the front of the bus, what do you think we learned in April 1992 from the Rodney King verdict?
I think we learned that if we don't have our own economic base, if we're not educated as a people, we will always be victimized by whomever.
But what can we do? I mean, we
we-
learned
So
what
if
we
Rodney
could
King
do
had
from
a
the
degree,
Rosa...
he wouldn't have gotten beaten?
That ain't what we learned.
Is that what you're telling me?
What we learned was that when the police brutalized Rodney King, when they
right.
murdered Rodney, when they murdered black people, when the police power in this society manipulates justice in the criminal justice system, we learned that they're doing their job. Their job is to contain and intimidate and terrorize black people. And this system want to know what we should do? We have to build an independent black political party to take care of our own interests and coalesce with those groups and organizations that share our interests and understand that we have black enemies of black people in our community based on the notion that they could perpetuate a system of exploitation.
I'm sure we need ways to defend ourselves, and an independent black political movement would be an excellent way to do it. But you can't get blacks out of the Democratic Party, and you can't get them to use their vote strategically.
Don't tell me you can't.
They hate Republicans, and they love Democrats.
Jesse
Democrats
Jackson
love
is
poor
getting them
people
out
so
of the
well, they
Democratic
keep
Party.
them poor. So
Jesse
we don't
Jackson
have
is getting them out of the Democratic Party.
we don't have a political instrument of power. We are out of the two-way political process altogether, taken for granted by one party and ignored by the other. He has articulated one instrument of power. An economic base is an instrument of power. An educated population is an instrument of power. Why do you think the Asians do so well in this country? They are very well educated. The people in the Pacific Rim, they're Confucian. Their very culture teaches them to stick together, work hard, go to school, stable families. This is why they succeed. We have a consciousness now called civil rights. We won the civil rights battle. We must develop a new consciousness of freedom, which means we're not interested in sitting next to or being with. We're interested in being equal to, which will give us the right to be with or sit next to whomever we want.
You have to start that process where it matters most. If you talk about what Rodney King taught me was that if the community doesn't control the police, nobody else is going to. And that you have got to put into the hands of the community the power to have a police force patrolling their streets that answers to them, not to some bureaucracy somewhere that isn't controlled by them. And that means economic development has to go hand in hand with the reclaiming of political power at the grassroots. Control your streets, control your police, control your judiciary. And this is not a new idea, by the way. America was supposed to be this way. The small towns that people idealize were basically neighborhoods controlled by the people who live in them. And our neighborhoods are no longer controlled by the people who live in them. And so most institutions in those neighborhoods, economic, political, and otherwise, are out of control.
In the immediate aftermath of Mr. bin Wahad's call for a third political party for African Americans, I am compelled to ask Dr. Alan Keyes, Republican candidate for the Senate from the state of Maryland, how the Republican Party, of which you are a member and at whose convention you spoke, does not enjoy the support of 10% of African Americans. You spoke from the same platform as Patrick Buchanan, who called on the delegates to take back our culture. You work for a man who was dragged kicking and screaming into the signing of a Civil Rights Act.
Work for? Who do I work for?
Do you not, in a sense, work for George Bush?
Absolutely not.
Did you not?
I'm an independent politician.
Did you
I
not
have to
extol?
make my own army
Did
these
you
days.
not extol George Bush's passage of signing of the Civil Rights Act and the Act for the Disabled during his administration? And does it embarrass you at all to be surrounded by the white Christians who would call for?
Oh, excuse me. It doesn't embarrass me to pursue the power that is needed to transform the society by any means necessary. People have transformed that phrase to mean violence and all this. It doesn't mean that at all. It means look for what's going to get you ahead and get there. Don't be so stupid that you allow people to convince you that a door to political power has the Republican label on it, so don't walk through it. If the door is a door you can walk through, take the power and worry about the rest later. You are not going to get me to say that I am not going to walk up the path that many other people have walked up to toward political power in this country. I'm going to stay out of politics because Pat Buchanan is in it, then he will control the situation. Don't give me this. I am going to do what is necessary to make sure that my folks are represented at every level, in every party, in every walk of life. And if we've got to stop being so silly that we're manipulated into believing that if we give our allegiance to one party or another without having to ask for what they're doing for us lately, no other group in this country is expected to give knee-jerk allegiance in that way, and we're going to be taken for a ride if we do.
Phil, would you? You were. I noticed that you were rather interested in my question. We should say again that his opponent in this race this November is Barbara Mikulski, who declined our invitation to appear on our panel. Mr. Brown, sir, briefly.
Phil, would you think of ever asking a black Democrat why he or she is supporting a candidate who belongs to, attended white country clubs, a candidate who has stayed away from black people, although he depends on their race and so forth? There is no Democrat or Republican Party that is better or worse for black people. Neither party is doing anything.
This makes Mr. Bin Wahad's point, doesn't it?
I said we need a third party. We need a way to strategically use both parties. But the inference is that when a black joins the Republican Party, you sound like one of the black leaders. It's sort of like you call their mother a name or something. You know, we need to be in both parties. We know the Democratic Party was the party of segregation. It was the party of tacit lynching. It was the party that kept us down for decades, and we changed the party because we went into the party. We can't